Hello, my name is Gertrude and welcome back to the Tech Girl podcast. Today's conversation sits right at the heart and intersection of technology, work and uncertainty. With the EU Act now paused, delayed or whatever you may call it, questions around fairness, accountability and trust in AI-driven hiring feels more open than ever. And this is the reason why this conversation really matters. My guest, Hang Lee. He is a recruiter by training, curator by trade, and a trusted global recruitment expert. Through his Brain Food newsletter and community, Hang has spent years making sense of how hiring really works beneath the surface. In this episode, we talk about AI across the recruitment funnel. Yes, an AI recruitment funnel actually exists. Why candidates and recruiters are sort of at arm's race and what it means to have AI risk recruitment. And what it means in practice, why inclusion becomes harder and not easier when intelligence is automated at scale. If you've gone through recruitment in the last 2 years, you know what we're talking about. We also go in somewhere between personal, belonging, identity, and what it means to live between cultures in a world that still thinks in binaries. Let's get into it. Hello. Today I'm excited to have Hang Lee on the Tech Girl podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Gertrude. Thanks for inviting me on.
That's amazing. You know, I've been looking through your work and I'm just amazed at the amount of depth you bring into recruitment. It's an underestimated area where everybody thinks recruiters are gatekeepers and they're the bad guys of the whole process, especially from the candidate side. But before we get into that, I would just like to know, in your own words, how you describe yourself and the work that you do.
Yeah, so I still self-identify as a recruiter, Gertrude, even though it's been some time since I last looked at a resume or sent a candidate forward to a job. Basically, I started my career as a recruiter, agency side, then went in-house, did a lot of the 0 to 50 type of tech recruiting for early stage startups and so on. I launched a tech platform about 10 years or so ago, basically like a labor matching platform. That failed, one of my numerous failures, I may add. But from that sort of attempt to rescue that business, I basically ended up trying to talk to my community a bit more. What was going on in the recruitment space, what were the challenges, what were the topics they wanted to discuss. And I ended up just doing a bunch of content, doing a lot of events and community-related activity. And so today, I guess I consider myself like a curator of information for the recruiting industry. I don't think, I don't like the term thought leader. I don't think I lead any thoughts particularly. But what I do try and do is to connect people in the industry so that they can kind of contribute to the conversation, because I think the collective intelligence is where we're going to get to the real good stuff in the end, rather than any individual kind of dominating the thought wave, so to say.
I like how you're being humble about the impact that you've had on the recruitment industry, because there've been so many nuggets of wisdom that you have produced on your newsletter, as well as all your other work. So thank you, and for calling it the little work is amazing. Maybe before I was intrigued by the name of your newsletter, and before I could just get to know how you got to the name of calling it, you call it brain food. Yes, brain food recruiting. Before we get into it, I thought to do this justice, we should straight away get into the edge of AI and recruitment and the various conversations you've had around that. And I would say, maybe to set us off, where is AI mostly being used when it comes to recruitment?
This really depends on when you intend to publish this episode, Gertrude, because one of the features of artificial intelligence is that the innovation rate is extremely fast. So whatever we say just gets dated almost immediately. But what I can say is that as of let's take the time from 2025 and into 2026. We're going to see artificial intelligence really being used throughout the entire recruiting funnel, as we would call it, as from the industry. That means finding candidates, that means screening candidates, that means engaging with candidates or sending outreach. That even means interviewing candidates using artificial intelligence rather than a human interviewer. So all of these things are starting to happen, some in different places and in different sectors, different jobs, but increasingly so. And I think if I was a job seeker today, I would be anticipating that I will be encountering some sort of AI interaction at some stage in the process, if not in several stages of the process going forward.
Yeah, that's really nice. Where do you see the greatest impact and advantage, both on recruiter side as well as candidate side, in using artificial intelligence in the recruitment process?
So the answer to this question probably requires two responses, Gertrude, because the reality is there's some tension as to what is sort of optimal for a job seeker versus what is optimal for a recruiter or an employer. So for instance, today, job seekers have the benefit of using artificial intelligence to improve their chances of getting a job and to improve the numbers of applications they can send and improve the quality of each one of those applications. So I think if I was providing job seeking advice, I would certainly recommend you use those tools, because if you didn't, then people who are competing for those jobs will probably outcompete you. So you almost need to do so. On the other hand, that creates a bunch of problems for people in the recruiting side, because they are then confronted with a much larger volume of applicants per job than they were previous. And because a substantial percentage of those applications have now been modified by, or should we say, are now AI assisted, AI enabled, it's increasingly difficult for a human recruiter to be able to identify what might or might not be a strong candidate or not. So how a recruiter would respond to that is that they themselves deploy artificial intelligence to help handle that volume application flow. So we kind of have a evolutionary pressure within the job search exchange, where one side is using tools to improve their chances, but that creates challenges on the other side. So the other side responds with tools, and we're going to keep on going in that type of dialectic, I think, ad infinitum. That's basically what the future is. We shouldn't be appalled by this. It's just simply going to be how human beings are going to discover each other in future. It's going to be mediated by an artificial intelligence rather than through direct discovery.
Oh, nice. I think that also echoes on something that you've previously talked about with regards to policy, and particularly the EU AI policy when it comes to recruitment. What should we know about it, and what should we be wary of?
This is such a huge topic, and it's difficult to explain simply because we're still in contention on it. Even experts will sometimes come out with contradictory advice. And the reason is the EU AI Act is a directive. So in other words, it will say, hey everybody, we think you need to do this, and you need to kind of do all you can at local level to according to these guidelines. But then every country within the EU will interpret those laws differently, or those directives differently, and they'll have different implementations. And of course, once sort of legislation goes in, it comes down to, okay, how enforced might it be? You know, how determined and rigorous is the enforcement of some of these legislation, depending on country and resources and so on. So the answer is none of us really know. What we do know, though, is that recruitment and the use of artificial intelligence in the activity of recruitment is considered quite a high risk. So EU AI Act basically has a tiered understanding of the risk of AI to humanity, I guess. and it just ranks it in terms of what the application is and how risky it might be. So, for instance, if I was using AI to give me some recommendations for a banana cake recipe, presumably that's quite low risk, right? Generally speaking, no one's going to be too bothered by slight variations of recommendations there. However, if I sort of say in the job search and I want AI to recommend me the best candidate for job, that's considered to be fairly high risk, because suddenly I might be making decisions that could substantively impact that individual unfairly. So the pressure here is for recruitment technology vendors to make sure that they are producing software which is in compliance with the EU AI Act. Here we open up another can of worms, saying, okay, we can understand maybe EU-based organizations being compliant, but the vast majority of recruitment technology is actually built by US companies. And the US companies have a different attitude. They have a different legal system. Do they feel themselves to be under the sort of jurisdiction of anything the EU says? Maybe before they would say, you know what, we're not under the jurisdiction, but we pay respect to it because we want to trade within the EU marketplace. I'm sorry to say it, we have to bring in Donald Trump here because Donald Trump has gone to bat for US big tech. And he has said to the EU, do not ever levy fines on our big tech companies. So it could well be that how significant this will be depends on how protective Donald Trump is on US technology vendors against potential penalties that the EU might level to them going forward in future. So yes, I haven't been very helpful here, but it's basically hugely complicated and different people are doing different things. Smart people are doing different things. That's probably the best way to put it.
No, that's a really good answer, and it sets the pace for just being curious to start with about the act itself, as it is interpreted very differently, as you mentioned, from country to country. And the EU in particular is very specific in how they then trickle down those directives. I mean, it's different, even just Sweden, where I'm based, to, let's say, Germany, on how they conduct recruitment. But on that, something that's been a point of concern for me, and I have seen that you've spoken about it a lot as well, is inclusion. How then can we have sort of guardrails and ensure that people that are from, let's say, underrepresented communities, geographies, backgrounds, do get a fair chance?
This is going to be the real answer here, Gertrude, unfortunately, is that it is a significant uphill struggle. And there's a number of reasons for this. So I know on one level we could say, look, you could prompt the AI to be inclusive. You could even prompt AI to kind of support underrepresented groups or disadvantaged groups. You can actually do that, and that's actually the frequent response to that sort of the vendors of producers of these technologies will say. They'll say, hey, listen, our technology isn't biased. You can actually tell it to do what you want it to do. You go in there and say, I want to recruit only Chinese people in the UK. And it'll just presumably it'll produce a warning, probably flash up a warning sign saying you're being super prejudiced, but it might actually then deliver a list of people that are Chinese ethnicity in the UK, and I might appear in that. So that's how a lot of the vendors might sort of say that's how you do it. But the reality is it goes a lot deeper than that, because when you think about the people who are producing artificial intelligence today, that's not most of the world. AI frontier models is actually, there's only really two countries in the game. That's the US and China. So, okay, significant population, significant countries, but there's billions of people that are not involved in shaping sort of these frontier technologies. You look at the ethnicity of the people that are producing these technologies. It is actually lots of Chinese people in America and China producing this, plus a bunch of Indian people, lots of East Asians generally, predominantly men. right? We have sort of these weird cohorts, not weird cohorts, but narrow cohorts that are not representative of humanity actually building these technologies. Good or bad, we don't know, is probably fair to say, but it is noteworthy that it is not representative of anything like representative of humanity, particularly on the gender side. It's like very heavily skewed on gender. Final point. Most of the AI is trained on the internet,
Yes.
right? The AI is trained on something called a common crawl, which is essentially all published data on the internet. Guess what? Most of the common crawl is English, right?
Yeah.
So the base layer of the training data that AI is trained on is actually trained on a language that is, yes, very popular, and yes, it's most widely spoken language in the world, but it is not every language in the world. It is many people on the planet do not speak English, or they speak English as second language. In which case, where is you can see inherently you're going to put bias into this system. So I guess I'm saying all of this, Gertrude, simply to say that it may be unrealistic to say that we'll ever get to a situation where we're going to have kind of equal treatment of every identity, equal treatment of every culture. We're actually entering into a sort of a world that is being determined by a small set of people and small groups of people. Now, all of this sounds depressing, I know, but we can also say, hey, this is how history works, this is how the world works, it's not the case that everyone has equal distribution of everything. In the end, everything gets shared around. There's another sort of possible positive on this, right? We can say at one point in time, mathematics was maybe located in India, let's say, but eventually everyone learned how to mathematics, so it all spreads around, we're all going to be good. However, we probably don't want to just overly be comfortable with that concept. So the area where sort of the thing that I want to drive towards and want to try and encourage is to try and sort of move away from a monolithic way of thinking of AI and really more towards a heterogeneous AI. We need a polyphonic AI, meaning we need many different AIs everywhere. We need every country to create a sovereign AI. We ultimately need to have every individual to have their own AI. And that is the sort of future I think we can go towards, even though we're battling against vested interest. We do have some allies. There's people out there. Jensen Huang, one of the most important people on the planet right now, CEO of NVIDIA, he himself is a proponent of the concept of sovereign AI. And he's got this very difficult sort of way to navigate because all of the ethno-nationalists are starting to say, yeah, you should just build for America. He's kind of quietly saying, actually, no, what we want is to have every country at least to have their own AI that's independent and interoperable with everything else, because you have to respect the difference. And by the way, you might imagine that would be totally different. Wouldn't it be cool if we all had AIs that was different and respectful of the cultures from which they emerge? I think as a human collective would actually go a lot further. The richness of all of that diversity is really going to help us think in different perspectives, help AI think in different perspectives. But right now we're moving more heavily towards the monolithical, hegemonic version of AI. That's problematic.
Yeah, I agree. And I also like that you say there's opportunities. And of course, that's where leapfrogging comes in for areas or geographies that are traditionally more steps behind. And particularly, I would think of Africa. Asia, interestingly, even though has some of the largest populations that are producing AI, still has that disadvantage when it comes to representation. But in that case, if we take every geography, people, and customization of AI, what would then be the biggest barriers for tech talent from these areas, and how then they create the different AI systems that are more customized for their regions and specific needs?
You can use the cost argument, you can use the energy argument, and there's a basic access argument as well. Like how fast is your internet, how reliable is your energy. All of those things make a difference in terms of powering anything digital, right?
Yeah.
So number one, let's improve the energy security of everybody out there. One of the wonderful things that we've seen of late is actually the surge in solar power installations across Africa has been one of the remarkable stories of 2025. That's fantastic because firstly, Africa is generally solar rich. And secondly, a lot of like installed solar is actually like home on people's roofs.
Yes.
So it's decoupled from the grid, which is decentralized, which is decentralized power generation, which is on alignment with this concept of having sovereignty, because you've kind of got sovereignty of your own sort of energy supply, so you're not dependent on an incompetent or a corrupt government who can't deliver the infrastructure for you. So that is step number one. But it also aligns with the idea that decentralization may be the way in which we provide the access. So open source AI, I think, needs to be strongly endorsed. Open source, for the people who are not familiar, is the idea that actually we're not going to put anything behind any patent. We're not going to say as a licensing program or whatever it is. It's like, here is how we've done it. You go ahead and use it. Go and do it yourself. Now, there are many, many open source models out there, and the performance level of some of these open source models actually exceed those that are behind sort of a patent wall, and oftentimes ones that sort of require a subscription. So why is open source great? Firstly, it's free. I mean, that's the number one. Right, you're talking about access, cost, etc. I mean, what is it? ChatGPT. I don't know how much it costs. $20, $30, $40. I don't know per month, something. But that $30 is very different if you're a person living in New York compared to a person living in
Zambia.
In Windhoek or somewhere. It's like huge gap, right? Huge difference. And it turns into a situation where you casually can't use it, or and a great deal of what we want to try and do with this kind of transformatory technology is to distribute it as widely as we can, and to do that you've got to do it for free, and then try and make money at a different part of the funnel. So the internet is a classic example. There was once upon a time, you're probably too young, Gertrude, but once upon a time you had to pay for the internet. Like some of the OGs might remember this. Like if you go back to, I don't know, late 1990s, going to the internet was like, oh, you had to buy a disc or something, and the disc would cost you £2.99 or something. It would be some cost. And then you just, it'd just be a very traumatic thing to try and get information. Now, of course, the companies that make the money off the internet, they make trillions, by the way, but they make it not by metering the internet, they make it by delivering service across the top of the internet. And so the hope is AI will be that way. Right now, OpenAI is trying to meter the internet, meter intelligence. It's trying to say, here is some artificial intelligence, and we're going to charge you per how much you use. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the best future. Best future is, okay, let's try and distribute this as widely as possible. Every human being should get access to this. And people who want to make money, let's do that at the application layer, not at the intelligence level.
Yeah, and sometimes I see it as well as on the rate limiting level, where that comes into play, which is great. You pay for what you use.
The rate limit I'm a fan of, because it actually drives people more towards either using multiple models, so they're just flicking through different models in order to get the free stuff. This is classic hacker behavior, but also it leans more towards the cheaper models, which are often the open source models. So the open source, when you open source a bit of technology, you're basically deciding not to make money out of it. Now you might say, okay, this is a sign of altruism. By the way, there's evidence that altruism does exist. For instance, Linux, one of the most widely used operating systems on the planet right now. Contrast that with a Microsoft operating system, which you have to pay and be licensed for. Linux OS is free. It was developed by a guy called Linus Torvalds. He gave it out for free. All right. he could have made trillions of it, gave it out for free. So it does work and it does happen. And it happens more than you think within the engineering community, which, by the way, you know, we had a little bit of a pop out earlier, but the engineering community, which is predominantly male, predominantly white or Chinese or Asian, they are actually promoting open source generally. So there's strong allies in that space. However, we've got to support that through usage. Because if we prefer, okay, you know, a flashier product, this, that, the other, what's going to happen is those open source products will die on the vine.
Yeah, that is true. Thank you so much. We're coming towards the end, but I still have 2 more questions for you that I would like to hear your perspective on. The first is related to sort of how you talk about how to hire in certain regions. Maybe just take me through your thought process around that, and if there are any significant differences when it comes to hiring both candidate side and recruiter side in those regions or countries. And you can pick whichever one you would like to zero into.
Yeah, great. I mean, firstly, there's a How to Hire series. So I travel a lot, and a part of the reason why I do travel is because I do want to speak to local recruiters wherever I am, because fundamentally I believe that local conditions make oftentimes a decisive difference in terms of whether you succeed or fail. So yeah, How to Hire is all about trying to understand what are the local nuances. So there's basically universal challenges in recruitment, and oftentimes we hear universalized solutions to those. You know, it's like, we can't hire enough this type of person. How do we do that? And someone will roll out, here's the technique. But the local solution, but the universal solution oftentimes is not going to apply given some like small or seemingly insignificant or trivial fact in the local market is going to just completely turn that solution into the worst thing you could do. So little techniques are different. Give you a quick example. So I was in India earlier this year. India, wonderful country. It has this very diverse country, firstly, so I'm using broad brushes here. But one thing that's probably consistent is that in India, you need to do a lot of real-time collaboration. You need to do a lot of, you need to calibrate information all the time, meaning that pre-planning is, you can't rely on a plan that was made a week ago. You have to constantly check in on what's going on. So I was thinking, I didn't know this until I spoke to some of my Indian friends, because one of the most obvious uses of artificial intelligence in recruiting has been using artificial intelligence to help schedule interviews, for instance. You know, when you're trying to book an interview with 2 or 3 different people, a candidate, 2 hiring managers, you're trying to chase them all around. It's like totally impossible. It takes you 5 hours to nail them to a time. You book the time, and then one of them's got a appointment that's just popped into their diary. They can't make it anymore, so you got to go around that entire email loop again. Complete nightmare. Okay, why don't you use AI to do this? And I thought, right, surely this is the one case that might be universalized. Like, everyone needs this coordination. And I went to the Indian press and said, why the heck aren't you using like scheduling tools? I said, no, this don't work, man. This don't work here. And I said, why is that? I said, listen, it's basically because everyone in India kind of understands that their lives are always going to be interrupted by something unexpected. So in other words, everyone's highly tuned to a slightly chaotic day. They're always tuned. Yes, there's a general idea that they want to be in this place at that time, but there could be a situation which prevents that from happening. And so how Indian people deal with it is that they calibrate on the phone. So they always check in. Is everything okay? Yeah, fine. Nothing's happening. We're going to be there. So you've got to do a lot of old school following on the phone, because they don't trust the plan. It's so the calendar is actually very low in the priority list of things that they value. Whereas, let's say I'm in the UK, so I'm living in sort of the Anglosphere, so to say. Pretty much nothing happens unless it goes in the calendar, right? If it's not in the calendar, I forget about it. So I'm like totally outsourced my to-do into the calendar. That is not the case in India, and presumably not the case in different places. So yes, absolutely, you should travel around and learn, okay, what are the local conditions which cause certain ideas to work and certain ideas not to work?
In that case, how then do you plan for, let's say, remote recruitment, and how does that pan out?
Are we referring to the India context specifically, or are we talking just wider about remote?
Like the India context that you've mentioned, I mean, I can relate to that because I'm originally from Zambia, and it's pretty similar. That's why I was laughing when you said that, because I could highly relate to how the calendar is. It's a nice to have. We could look at it, but we have to prepare for unforeseen circumstances that can happen anytime. But now there's a lot more remote roles for different companies in different parts of the world. But how do you then prepare for that in terms of interviewing as well? Both for the recruiter and candidate, actually.
Remote is we're in a really interesting space with remote, and I've probably got some, I think, pretty advanced sort of ideas as to where it is, but they're not popular, so they're quite marginalized, right?
Okay.
So I don't think the rest of the most of the recruitment market thinks like I do when it comes to remote.
I'd like to hear your thoughts.
But okay, so remote basically had a very peak moment during just really it was COVID really pushed the entire world remote, and that really broke through. It kind of mainstreamed the concept of working in remote, and then suddenly everyone realized, it looks like we can do most of this stuff without being in the office. And we had a short period of time, 2-3 years, where we thought, remote was going to be the dominant and default way in which we're all going to operate. This is fantastic. This is 2021. All of the valuations of remote-based businesses went through the roof. Zoom was $1 billion company for some reason, all that type of stuff. Crazy stuff going on. However, basically the world really hit a wall in the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, and three things really happened, which really, I think, stopped remote as the momentum of remote. So firstly, we obviously had significant conflict in the world. Now, I know there's conflict everywhere, and sometimes we in the West sort of say are only focused on conflicts that affect Europe or whatnot. We know there's conflicts everywhere. However, it was a big European conflict, remains a European conflict, and it's one in which you can say a great part of the Western world is involved in a very significant substantive way. Now, that is a huge blocker against the globalization drive which we were going for prior to that conflict, because suddenly we were in this weird place where everyone has to basically make decisions as to which side you're on. Can you put people over there anymore? Geopolitics is now like in the top 3 considerations for multinational CEOs. So suddenly the concept of global talent marketplace, hire from everywhere, is no longer the case. You've got to start thinking as an employer, you've got to start thinking, actually, what's the geopolitical risk of putting people in these places? So there's the number one sort of factor, which is kind of put the grit in the wheels of remote going forward. Number 2, obviously remote was powered a lot by these technology companies. So remote is best for companies that are digital, where most of the workers are digital, right? It's hard to operate a remote business when a lot of your people are factory workers or the delivery people or whatever it might be. It's easy to work in a remote first environment if everyone is sitting in front of a computer typing into a keyboard. Now, that entire model of globalizing sort of technology businesses also got hammered in 2021, 2022, because the interest rates started to be jacked up. The Federal Reserve in the US jacked up the interest rates 18 times in a row, and unprecedented. Now, the effect of putting sort of interest rates at that level, it basically sucks all of the venture capital money out of the system. And it sticks it back into the banks. It's trying to recapitalize the US financial system. Therefore, a lot of the money that would be funding technology companies that were the predominant users of remote workers went back into the banks. So less remote work, so the collapse of remote working. Final thing which causes remote really to hit the not only the brakes, but I think it's probably hit a brick wall, is of course artificial intelligence. ChatGPT was released end of 2022, created an enormous sensation, and it would look fantastic. ostensibly looks pro remote, but now we're starting to think, okay, how can I trust the person? Is the work really being performed by this individual? Does it matter if it is actually an individual that is producing everything via ChatGPT or via some sort of AI? Wouldn't I prefer this individual to be line of sight, sitting at end of desk to me rather than somewhere else in the middle of nowhere? So that AI has injected a huge, basically AI has eroded trust in remote. And I think that's where it's hit a big barrier. So does remote sort of happen? Of course it does. COVID has changed the world, become much more flexible going forward. But is it going to be optimal remote? No. We're actually rolling back a little bit on remote. So yeah, long answer to the question. Probably haven't answered it properly, but there you go.
No, that's fine. I like that you've also given the 3 pointers as to why you think remote is not the best, and the effects that we are now, the consequences that we're now facing based on that. Okay, we started off with the diversity dividend, and I just want to hear from you if there are any success stories where including tech talent from underrepresented regions has led to innovation, resilience, or unexpected growth.
Actually, I believe OpenAI themselves have come out. Caveat and research is it was somebody who was one of the frontier model leaders that actually came out to say recruiting people that were different from what they were sort of used to hiring had a tremendous effect, because they were bringing in new information and new ways of thinking that helps an innovation first type business. So I think that this makes sense. We can cite case studies or cite whatever evidence we like, but it kind of makes sense. If you are an innovation first company, you should seek diversity amongst the people that you bring into your business. In fact, let's put it this way. If you are a business that is in the exploratory phase of either a new product or a new service, or a new sort of market, it makes absolute sense for you to recruit from a very diverse talent pool, because you need as many different perspectives to figure this out, because your knowledge as to what works or not is not there. The however is, if you do know how to make money within a particular market and you do know how this thing works, then probably your reliance on diversity is less than it would be otherwise be the case. You might actually prefer to hire more homogeneity in that context. So let's sort of put so diversity, I think, again, this is a modern heresy, Gertrude. So again, a marginal view, but let's just share it. But diversity may not be an unallied good in every single situation. Diversity is probably optimally good in a situation where innovation is a priority and where the future path is unknown. Where homogeneity might be more valuable is when you have a very clear, narrow target. You want to hit the target, you probably just need people who are going to hit the target. And you don't need like the diversity of opinions. It's almost like decisions being made, we're not debating it, we're doing it. Okay, that's clear. And by the way, when I say diversity, I mean that in the truest sense of the term, in the sense of diversity of thinking, which is often correlated with diversity of, demographic identity, but not always. Like you can get people of very diverse skin types, skin colors, but they're all like monolithically thinking the same way. In the UK, by the way, we have factories to produce this. If you look at you look at Eton, the Eton to Cambridge to Oxford sort of pipeline, that is a classic case of producing homogeneity from diversity. Wow. You can get any sort of ethnic person, if you put them through that pipeline of education, they're going to come out like, they're going to come out as you might imagine. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
You can train a way of thinking, right?
Yeah, no, you can, which is interesting because it's easy to misunderstand diversity, but because it's also broad, right? And I always give the case of myself, where I'm originally from Zambia, but I have spent a majority of my adult years in Sweden. That means I'm diverse, but also monolithic in a way. In terms of my thinking, I can think in a more Swedish way, whereas I could give my opinion about the Zambian market. If someone is talking about market research, I could give my opinion, but the Zambia that I'm referring to is really old. It's many, many, many years old. So then I am diverse, but also the thinking can be, diluted. I would say.
We need to continue this conversation, Gertrude, because your experience, I think, is so fascinating. It actually, I think, it's quite analogous to mine in the sense that, obviously, ethnically, I'm Chinese. I live in the UK. That's my kind of mental training. But it's actually the third country I've lived in, and I'm not a UK citizen, right? So there's very much a case where I can understand the UK very well, but I don't belong to the UK. And I've got a tenuous relationship with my ethnic background. I can speak Cantonese. My family is still in Hong Kong, etc. All of that stuff is there, but it's so tenuous that, if I was to land in Hong Kong right now, I'd be picked out immediately as someone who wasn't from there. And I'm sure you're the same, Gertrude.
Absolutely.
And it's a weird dislocation because one of the challenges that we have, and I think it's a challenge, unfortunately, a lot of people in our situation don't come up with the best answers to, is how do you deal with this situation where you don't fully belong to any particular place, and you probably don't fully belong to any particular group. That can be very anxiety driving, because belonging is one of the very deep human sort of needs. You just have a look at the monkeys in the nature documentary, they're clinging onto the mum. Everyone needs belonging. So how do we deal with it when we don't have that belonging in as solid a way as we might? It's one of those challenges. I'd love to know how you're dealing with that, how you have dealt with it, and whether you got any advice to give to people who might find themselves in similar situations.
You know what I think? We should have another conversation where we talk about belonging and inclusion specifically, because it's one of those things where, like you said, I can feel that I'm here and I can relate, but I don't feel like I belong. I don't identify as Swedish, even though I do carry a Swedish passport. It's like, it's interesting because there's certain things that remind you that you're not of.
Yeah, and it's not hostility, right?
No.
It's not like, I don't feel, and then looking at the smile on your face, Gertrude, I think you feel the same. It's like, when I say this to some of my I hate to use the term, but some of my white friends in the UK, my white English friends in the UK, they are dismissive. They say, "Oh no, you fully belong here." Of course, what they think is that I've been like thoroughly rejected by the white England, and that's not the case at all.
No.
It's just the facts that there'll be certain points where there'll be reminders that you not only do not fully belong, but you cannot fully belong. And it's the realization of this that makes me feel, okay, that's not great, but here's the crisis, by the way. The crisis is if I feel that's outrageous, I become angry then. One of the choices I might have is then become angry at the host country, and then I might hate the host country. And that's where you get certain communities, ethnic communities that are immigrants that are very, very hostile to the host country they've been in because they feel rejected ultimately. And they then do a counter rejection. And say, okay, you reject me, I reject you, and it's like that. That's the wrong path because obviously there's no future in that path. No. Then you get the other choice, which is equally bad, which is where you get like an overly, you try to overly compensate for your rejection, and you become uber Swedish, right? It's like, like this guy in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders or whatever he is, the right wing guy, hates Muslims. But anyway. Of course, like his grandfather was an Indonesian guy. Of course, you can track there's some sort of rejection in his past, so he has to overcorrect and become the uber Dutch guy, even though, from a genetic point of view, like he would be equally rejected as other people. We have seen this as well, and again, that's the wrong choice. The difficult choice is basically to plot a path where you're not dependent on belonging. For you to have a good life and to have a good psychological state. I kind of end up realizing this Probably when I was 13, 14, and I said, you know what, give up, don't try and be overly British. That's never going to happen. But you're obviously not Chinese, so to say, because you go back to Hong Kong, China, wherever it is, they don't think you belong there either. So you can either hate the world or you can try and understand why people think like this, and you realize actually this is just normal human evolution, and you've got an advantage. Because you've got the ability to flip through some of these groups and to avoid the tribalism, and often even see through a lot of propaganda, has to be said. Propaganda doesn't work in the same way, because I don't truly belong to any of these places. So anybody's attacking any of these places, I can kind of slides off me a little bit. So I can see it for what it is. And I think that's an important thing to learn, because then it gives us a little bit of a responsibility to try and explain you're being manipulated, explain to others that actually you're being told this because these people want you to hate those guys, and actually you don't know anything about those guys, and probably someone on their side is having the same conversation. You need to just be aware. So we've got a little bit of an advantage, and maybe a responsibility as well.
That is true. Thank you so much, Hang Lee. It's been amazing talking to you. I hope we can continue the conversation on belonging and inclusion, as well as integration versus assimilation. That's something that I hear you echoing.
Book me into the next chat. we need to talk about this.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And where can people find you?
Yeah, so basically I'd usually say LinkedIn, but I'm maxed out on LinkedIn. You can follow me on there, but you can't connect. But search Hung Lee, HUNG.LEE, anywhere in Google. I should be the first guy that pops up. Just add me anywhere you see, and you can follow me there.
Thank you so much. And your connection link will be added in the show notes. So thank you, and have a lovely day.
Thank you, Gertrude.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. Now, what I appreciate about Hang's perspective is that he refuses easy answers. Yes, AI is reshaping recruitment fast. Yes, policy is struggling to keep up, especially with the EU AI Act now delayed, as I mentioned. But that doesn't mean we need to slow down. Technology doesn't remove biases or complexity, it repackages it. And maybe the real work is not working for perfect rules or laws, but staying curious, asking better questions, and resisting the urge to default to a one-size-fits-all thinking, especially when it comes to hiring. If this episode made you rethink AI in recruitment and hiring, remote work, and what fairness actually looks like at scale, share it with someone who's navigating these changes in real time. I'm Gertrude, and this has been the Tech Girl Podcast. Until next time, let's keep the conversation honest, human, and just a little bit uncomfortable. Goodbye.